1600.
WWRL.
New York.
An Access One communications radio station.
Kurland's on the air. It's Yetta Kurland live. Yetta Kurland, listen in.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Yetta Kurland Live. I am your host, Yetta Kurland, and tonight we will be celebrating Black History Month. We will be speaking with civil rights leader Marvin Bing Jr., political commentator Ron Paul, the national NAACP board member Scot Esdaile, and we will also be speaking with leaders of Harlem Pride, Carmen, Neely, and Robert West. I first want to thank our media partners, Go Magazine, Labor Press, the Soho Journal, Westview News, and the New Civil Rights Movement for helping make this show happen, as well as our community sponsors, the Ritz and Whole Earth Bakery. You can pick up a copy of the Westview News at 69 Charles Street. Check out Go Magazine at your local newsstand or at gomag.com. The Soho Journal at sohojournal.com. The New Civil Rights Movement at thenewcivilrightsmovement.com. And Labor Press is at laborpress.org. Also, you can listen to us live stream at wwrl1600.com. And please join us on Facebook at Yetta Kurland Live or on Twitter at Yetta Kurland. You can also check us out on the Huffington Post at huffingtonpost.com/Yetta. This week in the news, thousands of Americans descended on Washington, D.C. and held local actions connected to the Forward on Climate movement to prevent the dangerous Keystone XL pipeline being built from Canada to Texas. The Associated Press got into controversy when they issued guidelines that failed to properly acknowledge LGBT spouses. Meanwhile, the Respect for Marriage Coalition released a 30-second ad called Time for Marriage, featuring Republican leaders like Dick Cheney, Colin Powell, and Laura Bush, along with President Barack Obama. Meanwhile, here in New York, some of the city's lowest paid workers, the car washeros, won a victory as jobs were protected at a Soho location after a long fight. Attorney General Eric Schneiderman weighed in on the side of the workers and their union. A special city council election also occurred in Queens. It looks like still undecided, as 2 of the 8 candidates are separated by only 26 votes. It's really true that every vote matters. Both frontrunners are claiming victory at this point. It will probably be days, if not weeks, before there is a final determinant as to who the winner is out in Queens. And the mayoral race got a bit more complicated as the Independence Party endorsed former Bronx Borough President Adolfo Carrion. Carrion, a former Obama administration official, is also seeking the Republican line. We'll be talking about organizing, marriage, mayoral politics, Black History Month, and more right here on Yetta Kurland Live with Marvin Bing, Roy Paul, Scot Esdaile, Carmen Neely, Robert West, and you, the listeners. Be sure to call in, ask us questions, give us some comments. The number to do so is 212-868-0975. Again, that number is 212-868-0975. Let's go to our first segment. We'll start with Mr. Marvin Bing. He is the Northeast Regional Director for the NAACP. He's also worked at the AFL-CIO, the Congressional Black Caucus, and One Nation Working Together. He was a lead organizer for last year's game-changing End Stop and Frisk March, the silent march in Harlem. His work and his rise from tough circumstances in Philadelphia to a civil rights leader here in New York City has earned him this February's Impact Leader of the Month award. We're delighted and honored to have him on the show tonight. Thanks for coming on to Yetta Kurland Live, Marvin.
Hey, thanks for having me, Yetta.
Always. Next, Roy Paul. Roy is a political commentator, public speaker, and analyst. At the age of just 19, Paul became the youngest African-American elected to a school board in New York State. He is now a regular on-air contributor to WABC-7 in New York. As a journalist, he has interviewed the likes of Mayor Ed Koch, Mayor David Dinkins, Dr. Maya Angelou, and Lilly Ledbetter, as well as much more. Roy, thanks for coming on the show with us tonight.
It's a pleasure.
What was it like interviewing Lilly Ledbetter?
Oh, she's amazing. She is from and lives in Alabama, and so she has the Alabama drawl.
Nice little drawl,
voice.
yeah.
And it's just as sweet as can be.
Huh. Awesome. And next we have Scot X Esdaile. Scot is the president and national board member of the NAACP chapter, I believe, in Connecticut. Is that correct?
CT, Connecticut's in the house.
Connecticut is in the house. Thank you so much for taking
Glad
time to come on.
NYC.
Yeah, you were just at the Manhattan chapter, the Midtown chapter of the NAACP, giving a little speech, and we'll talk about that tonight as well.
Black History Month event. Glad to be here.
Yeah. You guys just swore in your new president, Jeff Eaton.
Big shout out to Jeff Eaton.
He was great. It was a good evening, and I really appreciated what you had to say. So if you've got questions or comments, folks, please call in 212-868-0975. That number again is 212-868-0975. It is Black History Month. We will start out with Mr. Marvin Bing. First off, big congratulations to you on the Impact Award. Tell us a little bit about what Impact is. You didn't know this? Yeah.
Oh no. So. Team Impact, and big shout out.
He's just getting honored so many times. It's hard to keep track of all of it.
I'm not big on awards.
Big dog. In New York, I get straight.
But to much credit, Impact DC is a nonprofit organization focusing on bringing in as many minorities, persons of color, into the legislative process in Washington D.C. You know, a lot of times, young people of color, Black, Hispanic, Asian, they're so detached from the federal government process, and under the leadership of Angela Rye, Joe Briggs, David Johns. What they have embarked on and set out to do is try to bring as many young people of color into that process through internships, through fellowships, through town hall meetings, seminars. They're doing really great work. So I was definitely proud and honored to even be recognized by such a prestigious organization.
There were all sorts of people in the House, really incredible celebrities, representatives, elected officials, and movers and shakers. And it's really incredible to see the movement, like you said, young African-American folks and folks of color really coming together. In fact, when afterwards I was invited to go to dinner with Mr. Bing, and he brought me to Sylvia's restaurant, which I was like, really going to bring me to the most famous restaurant in Harlem, and it was closed. And they were like, when I walked up, they're like, sorry, we're closed for the evening. And then they saw Mr. Bing's face there, and they're like, ushers us right back. How do you get that kind of clout up in the area?
I mean, Sylvia.
the big dog.
He's the big dog. I was like,
rest in peace to the beautiful Miss Sylvia Woods and to her family. But establishments like Sylvia's, with the new trend in Harlem, with the new, I'll say gentrification, a lot of small businesses and businesses that have been around for so long are being forced to move, shut down. And places like Sylvia's, we have to support so they can stay in the community. They've done so much for the community. So, anytime I can get a meal, they let me in. So that's a good thing.
That's good. We sat at a table where supposedly Barack Obama had sat, and I believe Marvin Bing sat in the exact seat that President Barack Obama had sat in.
That was Sylvia's at Red Rooster. Which one?
Sylvia. That was Sylvia.
We started out at Red Rooster. We ended up at Sylvia. And Roy, let me ask you. Marvin talks about kind of the trendy movement in Harlem. There is this issue, and there's a concern with gentrification. At the same time, there's a lot happening with the youth of Harlem. There's a real cultural movement. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how does that impact the politics of Harlem and the politics of the Black community?
Mm-hmm. Just to piggyback one quick second, I actually joined you guys later at Sylvia's, and when I went to the door, they said, we're closed. I said, I'm here with Marvin Bing.
There we go.
But to your issue of gentrification, I actually live not too far from Red Rooster and Sylvia's. I live on 122nd and Lenox, so just a couple of blocks down. And I'm seeing firsthand the gentrification, not only in Harlem, but in the town, the brownstone that I live in. I'm one of two African Americans who live in my brownstone. Everyone else is Caucasian. And I think in a perfect world, we would love that people move into communities and people won't have to be forced out. And I think that's the problem with gentrification. I don't think anyone is against having a multicultural environment. They just don't like it when people who have been there for decades and generations can't afford to live there anymore.
Absolutely.
And so politically, the way that it needs to happen is that we need to have everyone's voices heard in the political process, especially young people. And that's why Impact is so important in what they do. Because before organizations like Impact, you have the old guard say, we love young people to get involved. And I've been involved in this for a long time, too. And when I was trying to run for office, everyone said, we love young people to get involved. We have a lot of envelopes in the corner that you can lick.
That's right.
And there's several phones. Pick a phone and you spend hours on the phone and go knock on doors. But the moment you say you want to run for office, you're a target and you become a threat.
Yeah.
And organizations like Impact dispel that and say, you know what? We're here. We're the future. we want to get involved.
And there's so many ways that we disenfranchise our youth. You're not ready, you're not knowledgeable, it's kind of a joke that you're even thinking about running. It's hard to get those kind of voices out there. Scott, let me ask you a question.
Well, while you're on that subject,
yeah, please.
Dr. Martin Luther King took over at 26. The Black Panther Party was all young people, college students. Julian Bond, who was a former chairman of the NAACP, was a young guy when he got involved in politics. So young people, if you're listening, never let that discourage you. Keep fighting, stay involved, stay active, and push them out the way if they get in your way.
You are listening to Scott Esdaile, Marvin Bing, and Roy Paul here on Yetta Kurland Live, WWRL 1600, Equality Pride Radio. Call us with questions of your own, 212-868-0975, recognizing, celebrating, appreciating Black History Month, finding ways to show up, to all be a part of it without excluding others, and making sure that we push forward, folks. I think that there's a way for everyone to be a part of, whether that be Harlem, whether that be the LGBT movement, whether that be women's rights, but there's a way to do it, I think, in a way that empowers those around us rather than, displaces or disempowers. Let's go to our first caller if you guys want. We're going to go to Peter from Manhattan. Peter, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live. You're on the air.
Yes, hello, Yetta, and hello to the panel. You know, that sound, Black History, it sounds beautiful. Unfortunately, when I try to figure out today's NAACP, they're calling themselves people of color or some other ridiculous term. The NAACP, this is a question, and I don't mean to offend anyone here. It's mainly your elders I'm offending, because they didn't train most of you young cats right. This was a black thing that benefited everyone else back in the 60s, okay? You listening to me here, people?
Yes, I
I'm
am.
listening.
Today, when my friends come home from the penitentiary, they can't do dishwashing jobs no more. The Jews used to invite them up to Grossinger's and whatever, and they would wash dishes, shine shoes.
Peter, I'm going to interrupt you for...
Wait.
Yeah.
There are no black working in Manhattan anymore.
I think you make
But the
a couple of...
NAACP is saying that they're down with all these other people except us. Comment, please. Don't hang up and listen.
Thank you so much, Peter. I know, Scott, you talked a lot about jobs tonight. I think you said some really great things. I think he's talking also about the idea of how we use language, which I also was really inspired by your talk tonight at NAACP, but maybe you could respond to a couple of those points.
Well, I want to know exactly what his question is, because it's kind of broad, but in reference to the NAACP, and brother, I understand your concerns, and I've heard the concerns over the years, but the NAACP was founded by blacks and whites.
Absolutely.
And the foundation of the organization was to stop the lynchings that were going on in the South. It was a stop the killing movement, and it was a huge campaign. The organization was actually founded here in New York City, February 12, 1909.
That's right.
We talked a little bit about the Plessy versus Ferguson case in the late 1800s that created separate but equal in the United States, and how Charles Hamilton Houston put a group of young attorneys together. We talked about young people before, Thurgood Marshall, my aunt, who's Constance Baker Motley, and a lot of other bright young attorneys at Howard University on a historical black university's campus. And they put this great team of attorneys to go to the Supreme Court and fight in the Brown versus Board of Education case. And when they had that victory in 1954, it broke the backbone of the Plessy versus Ferguson case. I know that you're an attorney, and it changed a lot of how America did business. And there was a lot of major other civil rights victories after that. But the NAACP is a civil rights organization, and we protect the civil rights of all people. Yes, it is the majority. Organization is a majority of black people in the organization, but it's an organization for all colors. For all colors. And when you say that the organization was founded for black people, actually the organization was founded to stop the lynchings in the South, where a lot of people's rights were being violated by the basis in the color of their skin.
Right, and just to thanks, Scott, for that historical context. It's very important that folks know how the NAACP was founded. But even if you look at today's society, I mean, growing up in the inner city, my neighborhood, I was born in Philadelphia. It wasn't just black folks. I mean, we hung with white kids, Hispanic kids, Asian kids, it was a new dynamic as far as my generation. We grew up together. So we all face the same issues. We all look at the same problems. It's not, we work for one individual or one constituency group, because the realism now that we all have to work for each other, because when you bring everybody up, then everyone comes up together. You can't silo civil rights work anymore. You can't silo labor rights anymore. It has to be an all for one for all. It can't just be for my folks or your folks. We'll never advance and go anywhere.
But we do have to protect ourselves. So
Absolutely.
we don't want to get lost in that. I understand that, and that the LGBT movement can't lose themselves in the movement. They have to identify what they are, who they are, and include themselves in the entire movement of making America better. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. And it's interesting. We're actually going to be talking to some folks from Harlem Pride in the second segment. But I think as I'm listening to Marvin, as we came up with you, what the white kids learned to do is to make the connections, or some of us hopefully to connect the dots, and we learned to unlearn racism. We learned to unlearn homophobia.
The historical context is there was some great white people who protected us on the Underground Railroad. A lot of white people put their lives on the line of helping us learn how to read, helped hide us in their basements, helped us get from the South all the way up to Canada. The beginning of the NAACP was called the Niagara Movement, because you could never talk like that in the South. The only way you could talk anywhere near close to what the NAACP was talking about, you had to be up there in Niagara, New York. And then eventually they moved down to New York City, but you get killed, black or white, for talking the way that we're talking on the radio right now. So we wouldn't be able to go, walk down the sidewalk talking the way we were talking back in those days.
But for the gentleman who did call on the question, please be assured that each and every day that we wake up, we're trying to protect as many people of color as possible, knowing that, most of the time we are the most disenfranchised, and we do have a problem with people returning home from prison, and every day our criminal justice department is working on the
Now, if you want to talk about jobs, because he brought up the issue about jobs, I agree with him wholeheartedly that when I went to college, maybe two or three out of the 10 guys that I grew up with, we went to college, but everybody else went and worked in the factory. They did very well. They got jobs in the factory. They worked 2 jobs, worked some overtime. They did very, very. They all had cars, and they were putting their first down payment on the 3-family house and all that kind of stuff. They were doing very well. But when the factories left in the late 70s, early 80s, those jobs were dismantled and brought overseas. Now, the guys that used to be in the factories are taking it to the streets. And that's why we have so much gun violence and so much people going for self in communities all over the country. We were talking about Chicago earlier today too. That Chicago is off the chain right now. I mean, during this past blizzard, I know Connecticut got really hit hard. I know New York got hit somewhat hard, but the blizzard was in Chicago first. 7 people murdered and 30 people shot during that week.
In the middle of a blizzard.
In
the middle of a blizzard.
Yeah.
But it shows you how bad and desperate people need jobs. I know Bronx has an issue. I know Harlem has an issue. I know Brooklyn has an issue. Queens has an issue. Urban areas in Compton, Philadelphia, they call it Philadelphia now, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. It's rough there. I'm going to be going down to Chicago soon to help from my NAACP National Board perspective to the south side of Chicago to try to help out there. But Detroit is tough. Camden, New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey. I mean, this issue is nationwide. And I think it would be great for New York to be a shining example of how we need to keep the president focused on jobs. Jobs. Because those guys, say if a young man wants to clean his life up, he wants to pull his pants up, he wants to cut off his braids, hide his tattoos and all that stuff, wear a shirt and tie every day, he goes to all the training, and after the training, then what?
No jobs.
No jobs. And now I'm even more bitter when I go back to the streets.
And speaking of jobs, I think to piggyback on that, we need quality jobs.
That's right.
When I was on the Board of Education, we kept talking about the achievement gap, trying to make sure that minority students fared better well academically to their white counterparts. Then we started talking about the opportunity gap. We never talked about the opportunity gap. It was always about making sure they achieve, and once they started achieving, the opportunities. Where are they? They're not there.
And college is not for everybody.
Absolutely.
We can't get, college is not for everybody.
So we need good jobs and access to good health care as well.
Union jobs.
And unions are, that's right, that's absolutely right. We're going to talk about politics in 2013, but I really think 2013 is certainly in New York City. It's the year for the unions, man.
It's the year for the working people.
It's the year for the working people. You're listening to it right here on Yetta Kurland Live. Let's go to our next caller. We're going to go to Benny from the Upper West Side. Benny, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live. You're on the air.
Hey, Yetta. Is the NAACP coming out with an endorsement anytime soon for a mayoral candidate? If so, who would they be endorsing?
We
don't endorse candidates, sir.
Yeah, I think they're a 501c3 if I'm not mistaken, so they don't endorse candidates.
But we do mass voter registration. What you do with your vote, we just want to make sure that you do vote. We do voter turnout, but at the end of the day, we do not endorse candidates.
And we also do issue advocacy, so we will be supporting an array of issues, and we will educate the voters of New York City on those issues, and the candidates who support or don't support those issues will be made clear.
And also, obviously, voter disenfranchisement is a big issue, an issue we face nationally, an issue that's impacted, especially in communities of color. How does the NAACP, are they doing anything to try to address that?
Talk about the Supreme Court, February 27th.
So, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which, this past last year, legislative session, a lot of states went after voting rights. Your photo ID, you need to show your immigration papers.
Yeah.
They were doing all kind of stuff. It didn't happen. I used to be. I'm a Harlem boy now.
Good,
I'm a die in New York. No, I pay taxes in New York. 6 years straight. Check the records. But no, so right now, Shelby versus Alabama is up in front of the Supreme Court, February 27th. And
we'll be mobilizing people to go down to D.C.
If Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act is stricken out, places, it's a lot in the South where states, the Department of Justice has to approve any redistricting measures, because back in the day, it was race baiting, redistricting, and elections. But also in the North,
because that never happens today, right?
Oh, no.
It's all gone. Yeah.
No, you see the redistricting in New York City.
I was going to say this also impacts districting right here.
Well, a lot of northern cities, Boston, Chicago, New York, were protected, not statewide, but cities where a high population of minorities live were protected under Section 5. So it's just as important for places like Philly, New York, Boston, Newark, New Jersey, Chicago to be just as concerned and active on this issue than the people who live in Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, because it affects us too. And if you're a New Yorker like I am, you've seen this last redistricting drawing of the maps went around, and it's not pretty.
We got to keep Section 5 alive, yo. So, like President Jeff Eaton said from the Mid-Manhattan branch, we need to mobilize as many people from New York down to Washington, D.C. on February 27th to make sure that the Supreme Court justices see a lot of people out there and understand that there's a lot of support in keeping Section 5 alive.
Absolutely.
Sounds right. You're listening to Marvin Bing, Roy Paul, Scott Esdaile here on Yetta Kurland Live, WWRL 1600.
Connecticut's in the house.
And Connecticut is in the house. Call in with questions, 212-868-0975. Again, that number is 212-868-0975. We have just a few minutes left for the segment, so I want to try to get to some more callers if we can. We're going to go to Arnie from the West Village. Arnie, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live. You're on the air.
Hey, I guess I tuned in late, but I heard some regarding the Supreme Court decision back in Brown versus the Board of Education. Let's not forget Dr. Kenneth Clark, who's a psychiatrist who did the study with the two dolls.
Yeah,
the dolls.
Oh, yeah.
So that, it's very, very critical. Also, voter suppression, I think, is one of the greatest things that's happened to us in years, because it obviously turned out to vote.
And
a large number of folks came out to vote early in Florida and other states because of the voter suppression.
Right, right.
I mean, it happened in Pennsylvania. It happened in Florida. So the more discussion, the more they try to vote to suppress the vote, the larger our community would turn out to vote.
That's why they want to rip Section 5 out.
And also, I believe we're probably profiling this whole thing about jobs, that, the shootings and killings because they don't have jobs. I have many, many Latino and African American friends and white friends who live in Harlem and Esdaile who don't go around killing people.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a job. So we have to be very careful how we frame that, because I think that's how others would like it framed. And,
interesting.
Also, this thing about quality jobs. I don't know what quality jobs means. It's like saying affordable housing. I don't know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just too many young people. We know that not everyone is going to get a college education.
Well, let's talk about that.
Get more into vocational schools. If you want to be a cab driver, be the best cab driver there is.
Sure, absolutely.
If you want to be a sanitation worker, just
Dr.
be the
King
best sanitation worker there
the
is.
best street sweeper in the world.
You know, and so I think that's important. But I heard the name Jeffrey. By the way, Jeff, this is Arnie. I'm not supposed to give my last name, but you're a great guy. Mm-hmm. Also, let me mention something about, we talked about the civil rights movement in my generation.
Yeah.
And that is, there was a generation that integrated the lunch counters.
Mm-hmm. The lunch counter.
Went to jail, got beat up.
Yep.
And yet today, too many of our kids can't read the menu.
Mm.
Well, there's a serious problem in the educational system in terms of not only literacy rates, but rates of graduation, and just the public schools in New York are under attack, just like a number of the public services. But I think to the caller, I think what we were talking about in terms of living wages and the types of jobs is not so much whether you're a sanitation worker, whether you're a taxi driver, but the rate of pay that's being offered. And there's been just a real pushback in terms of living wages, unions here in New York City, and it's less about what the job is. It's more about how the workers are being treated in the jobs and the rates of pay that people are getting as the rents soar through the roof in New York City. You talked about gentrification in Harlem. It's happening, everywhere. So your rent gets higher and higher and higher.
And as the hedge fund communities reap big time profits.
Yep.
And they put the profits before the people. Now, I'm in Connecticut, and I understand because a lot of the rich people from New York move to Connecticut and get those big mansions up there in Greenwich and so on and so on. And that's the hedge fund capital of the world. But they all work here in New York.
Right.
So it all intertwines pretty much. But there's a huge push to kill the unions and put profits before people.
Let me ask you something, too. Before we go, I just want you to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with the Great Debate. Maybe people can get involved.
Well, I don't know if probably I'm quite sure a lot of your listeners are fans of Denzel Washington. And in 2007, he and Oprah Winfrey were producers of a movie called The Great Debaters. And it was a movie based on Wiley College from Texas. Which was an undefeated debate. Actually, they lost one debate against Howard University. For all the Howard alumni out there, big shout out to y'all. But anyway, Wiley College debated against Harvard University out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Wiley, the underdog, beat the big Harvard, and it was a huge achievement in the early 1900s. They showcased this movie, and the movie did very, very well. When the NAACP's 100th anniversary came about, I decided, due to the fact that I lived in New Haven, Connecticut, that I would have Yale University go against Howard University and do a great debate, and have a huge a campaign to bring more youth into the NAACP. Over 3,000 people came out to the event, and we registered like 1,600 new young people to become members of the NAACP. It's ironic that 1,600 WWRLs here. But anyway, it was a huge success. Starbucks saw the movement and understood the movement and felt that it would be a great idea to support and back. So now we're doing 16 debates across the country, and New York City has been chosen as one of those cities to bring the debate, and we'll be having Columbia versus Howard University, not this Saturday, but next Saturday, March 2nd, at First Corinthian Baptist Church up in Harlem. That's 1912 Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. The event starts at 3:30, March 2nd. We're asking everyone to come out. It's a free event. You could call the New York State Conference to make reservations or get more information. Once again, March 2nd, the debate will be Howard versus Columbia University right here in New York City in Harlem. And we're really excited about being in the biggest city in the world, the Big Apple, the home of Marvin Bing.
Taking on Columbia University. I love
it. Real big.
Marvin, Where can people go to get involved with the NAACP, learn about what you're doing, find out about the stuff that you're doing, whether it be the voter stuff, just to become a member?
You can always check us out on World Wide Web, www.naacp.org. You can also follow us on Twitter at NAACP. If you want to find me, just look for the nearest civil rights issue. I'm always there.
All right.
Behind the scenes, making sure it's happening.
Doing it real big.
But I just wanted to touch on one point before we close.
Yeah.
That's why this mayor's election is so important, because we're talking about the working people of New York.
Who's running? Who's running? Bloomberg against who?
Bloomberg's going to go for a fourth term? No.
Probably will. Well, if you... I can't comment.
Do they have term limits?
I can't comment.
I can comment.
We're going to get you guys back to talk about term limits. It's another show.
But this election has to be about the working people of New York. Right now we got a governor that understands this and is pushing for a minimum wage hike. There's a big coalition out there led by, RWDSU, Strong for All. There's a lot of 32BJs involved, NAACP's involved. And we have to make this election about working people. It can't be no more. Bloomberg said something the other day about he doesn't see homeless people on the street. I mean, if this guy and the people that follow him are saying things like that, I pass. How many people we want?
When we marched in New York City, that was the big mansion we were marching.
Right. So this election has to be about working people. New York City is a city of neighborhoods. It's not just Wall Street. It's not just the hedge fund.
Right.
It's a city of neighborhoods.
That's right.
And if you get past certain places in New York City, there are working people who pay real bills, who have real rent to pay, and have real families and real communities and issues. This election has to be about them.
And real college tuition.
Exactly. So this election, we have to please New Yorkers, whoever's listening. Let's not make this a popularity contest. Let's not make this, who's my friend, who's going to do me a favor. We got to think about the people in New York, the taxi driver, the sanitation.
Well, in Connecticut, we had Linda McMahon. She put $100 million of her own money up there.
And she still lost.
And she didn't win. So y'all got to put out the rich up here in New York.
That sounds good. Roy, well, quick shout out. Where can people go to learn about you?
www.roy-paul.com. Google me, Facebook. I'm all over the place.
Perfect. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming
New York,
on the show.
stand up.
And we got Connecticut. We're going to take a short break. We'll come back. We'll talk to you again. Thank you.
I'm always proud to be a New Yorker.
WWRL, sharing and celebrating the LGBT community's ideas, energy, and accomplishments.
But tonight, I am especially proud to be a New Yorker.
1600.
And we are back on Yetta Kurland Live, WWRL 1600 AM Equality Pride Radio, talking about Black History Month and politics, New York City, and more. Next up, we're going to be talking to Carmen Neely, Robert West, and John Reddick, all from Harlem Pride, here on WWRL. Call in with questions or comments, 212-868-0975. Again, that number is 212-868-0975. Carmen Neely is an activist and a voice for justice here in New York City, and she is one of the founders and the president of Harlem Pride. Carmen, thank you so much for coming on the air with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Sure. And next, Robert West is a social worker. Preliminarily, he's involved in the work that seeks to affect change on a community level via policy as well as advocacy. West joined the board of Harlem Pride, I think, in 2012. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great. Robert, thanks for coming on the air with us.
Absolutely.
And finally, we also have John Reddick, who's another board member of Harlem Pride. John, thanks for coming on the air with us tonight and talking to us.
I'm glad to be here.
Great. So, first of all, happy Black Pride.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, happy Harlem Pride.
Yeah. Well, and we were just talking to folks about the NAACP and efforts that they've been working on around civil rights. How did Harlem Pride come into existence, and what was your impetus to create Harlem Pride?
Okay. Well, initially, Harlem Pride started off as a house party. And the co-founder, myself, and Lawrence Rodriguez, who is the curator and owner of Casa Frila Gallery, were working on one of the annual exhibits he does for Pride Month. And so we were thinking of ways to get more people to the exhibit, and maybe instead of having the usual reception, we might throw a party. Mm-hmm. And from there, Lawrence, who's also part of the Black Association, we were able to team up with them to put together our party with the Black Association, so it turned into a block party. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, in 2010, we had over 3,000 people show up to the very first Harlem Pride, and we were amazed.
That's amazing.
And from there, the rest is history. Basically, we've continued. We moved to Marcus Garvey Park in 2011, and then Jackie Robinson last year in 2012, and Jackie Robinson again this year.
So this year, when is Harlem Pride? Tell us a little bit about what's happening.
Okay, well, it's the weekend of June 28th through the 30th.
Which is Gay Pride month.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Right there in June, and we start off with Friday being our VIP launch party, and then Saturday is our big day in the park, and on Sunday we march in the city parade.
Okay, so you guys have a contingent with the Heritage Pride, basically.
Yes, the Pride
That's
March,
great.
yes.
So other than the events around Gay Pride, do you do stuff throughout the year as well?
Yes, actually this year is our first year. We're 3 years old, and this is the very first year we have a full calendar of events all the way from January through December.
That's great.
Yes.
That's great. Robert, why is Black History Month important, and how does Harlem Pride interface with Black history?
Well, the Black History Month is important because it's American history, it's world history, and that intersection of the SGL LGBT community is just saying that you are a part of that history, and you see that no more better exemplified than in the SGL LGBT history of Harlem. You know, so many of those that we admire for Black History Month until recently. It had not been known that they were also SGL or LGBT. People like Langston Hughes or Zora Hurston or Gladys Bentley or
Bayard
Rustin. Bayard Rustin,
Yeah.
you know. And the time is ripe for the SGL LGBT community to take our place, not only during this month, but as part of the entire tapestry of the Black community, the American community, and the global community.
John, you know, obviously Barack Obama took such a powerful position, and NAACP also taking such a powerful position in support of marriage equality recently. Is there a sea change, the mentalities that used to be where one fight was over here, another fight was over there? Are we seeing a kind of coalition building that we've been talking about for so many decades? Is it actually coming into fruition now?
Well, really, in one of our early events, some newspaper went and interviewed like one really small church and went from that one point of view to say, oh, we are opposed to the LGBT community having an event in this park and this and that. And the newspaper really kind of played it up as if that was the way all of Harlem felt. And very immediately, Riverside Church, Abyssinia Baptist Church, these other churches really stepped up to the plate and said, no, they're welcome. We encourage them to come. And what started out as this sort of narrow kind of point of view really showed that we had much more support than we thought we had in terms of the religious community in Harlem. And I think after AIDS, I think in that period, you got to see whatever your stereotype of who was gay and who was straight, you know, that shattered all of that. There's people you had worked with. There were people in your church who served all capacities of the church and all that. And they realized that loss and that contribution. I don't think you can ever turn back from that experience and not see that there's a broader community. So I think where people are still dragging their feet, any religious group that's dragging their feet, they're actually losing membership, broader membership, because I think the next generation is overall.
They don't buy into those things, you know. And you know, this last segment we were talking about, you know, that I think all of us need to, if you will, deconstruct ism, whether that be racism, whether that be homophobia, and the roles, the appropriate roles that we each play in doing that. And you know, I remember when the Prop 8 stuff was happening out in California and it didn't go through, the first thing the LGBT community did was start pointing their fingers at communities of color, blaming communities of color as if that was the community that had stopped that from happening. And when we really looked at it, we realized we hadn't done a job in terms of going into communities of color. It was our own restrictions. It was our own mentality that actually had limited our efforts to organize, truly effectively organize for all parts of our community.
And also I feel like the African American community was on the vanguard of freedom for everybody. We didn't divide out who should be in and who shouldn't be in. It was about, you know, liberation in terms of what everyone's rights were. And every group that we are talking about now in the post-civil rights movement were fired up from the energy we gave them.
Yeah.
You know, and so I sort of feel like all of a sudden see that we're the outside when we were the radical players in the very beginning, you know, putting their lives on the line.
You know, Scot Esdaile, from the earlier segment, president from the NAACP in Connecticut, made a really interesting point in the presentation he gave this evening. He talked about the militancy of the movement, the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s, and I was so interested to hear that word and have it be used in a positive way. Have we lost that militancy, that radical element of the LGBT community, of the Stonewall uprising, of that type of energy, or are we seeing that just happening in a different way?
I think it's happening in a different way. You know, I think what's most radical about the messages that you deliver nowadays is one of joy and celebration. You know, when you talk about being on the vanguard of wanting to protect and create, you know, a space for people, the black community, since we're talking about Black History Month, has always done that, you know, and it's a very misinformed narrative that keeps being perpetuated nowadays, and it's one that continues to keep our community steeped in pathology and to keep young people in particular with this belief that people who look like you don't love you.
Right.
And I think that's such a disservice.
Right.
So the militancy can be just by saying, no, that's not the case.
Right.
You know, and to
resisting negative images, resisting that
and
type of.
That's radical. To be happy is radical. To spread joy is radical nowadays. You know, everybody, you know, is we're bloggers, and we get that, right, and we all think we have the right message. But oftentimes what we see is that instead of being original, you just perpetuate the same messages that have shown to not be effective.
And then part of why we did an event in Harlem, there's gay pride and there's a citywide activity, but the minority communities are kind of left out of that in a bigger way. And the wonderful thing about the block party, it was like that's the most basic aspect of neighborhood events in New York City. And for it to start there, where it really said the community says, come to our neighborhood, you're welcome. And of the 3,000 people, I think a lot of people were really surprised. Friends came from Jersey and places and says, oh wow, you know, they really are open.
And yet, you know, if I may say, to piggyback on what John just mentioned, when you examine the SGL LGBT history of Harlem, you'd be hard-pressed to find a richer history. From Stonewall to
the
Chelsea.
Harlem Renaissance.
It's awesome. And in a lot of ways, it was so ahead of its time. It was the mainstreamness that we fight for even now. You know, there were, if you go and sit in a watering hole uptown and you're lucky enough to have a conversation with the elders, they'll tell you, straight people. Oh, we love the balls. We know, we knew that person, and we were family. You know, and that's what we strive for now. So when you hear people say, oh, well, why aren't there gay bars in Harlem? Because we didn't really need it. It was that mainstream in a way, you know what I mean? Of course, I'm not burying my head in the sand and say, you know, that there were some difficulties, you know, like everywhere else. But, you know, I thought, talking about radical, I thought that was a real radical aspect of our movement.
Right. I also think there's some quiet radicalism, if you will, about people just standing up, being visible and being vocal, and just saying, this is who I am. And a lot of people have come out, celebrities and things like that, that supports the movement. And I also think that gives young children and our youth in general someone to look up to and just know that they're okay.
I had the honor of interviewing Mary J. Blige during the Democratic National Convention, and she came out for marriage equality when I was interviewing her. It was really exceptional. So yeah, it's incredible to see the steps forward, the movements, and the type of support. And you know, I always say it's important for us to fight for our issues, whether that be whatever issue that be, the issues that impact us directly. But it is truly transformational to get outside of ourselves, to connect the dots, and to fight for others. You're listening to Carmen, Neely, Robert West, and John Reddick from Harlem Pride here on Yetta Kurland Live, WWRL 1600 Equality Pride Radio. Call us with questions or concerns, comments. 212-868-0975. Again, that number is 212-868-0975. We're going to go to our next caller, Norman Hill from Washington, D.C. Norman, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live. You're on the air.
Thank you very much.
Calling all the way from Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Well, thanks for calling in.
I'm President Emeritus of the A. Philip Randolph Institute. I'm calling to identify with the aims and goals of Harlem Pride in the context and tradition of my mentors, A. Philip Randolph, who was this nation's greatest black labor leader.
That's amazing.
Founded the most historically significant union for black workers, the Brotherhood of Seaton Car Porters, the father of the modern civil rights movement, and I would include the Harlem Pride in that movement, and the initiator of the epic August 28, 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, whose 50th anniversary we celebrate this year. And Bud Rustin, Randolph's most outstanding colleague, a proud gay man, a civil and human rights leader in his own right, arrested over 20 times in the struggle for civil rights, and the organizer of the great August 28, 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom.
That's incredible, Norman. And
A. Philip Randolph and Barry Rustin once said, salvation for a race, nation, or class, and I would include gays as well, must come from within. Freedom is never given, it is won. Justice is never granted, it is exacted. And freedom and justice must be struggled for by the oppressed of all lands and races. And they would include not just blacks, Latinos, and women, but gays as well. And the struggle must be continuous, for freedom is never a final fact, but a continuing evolving process to higher and higher levels of human, social, economic, political, and religious relationships. They also felt that the fight, given that the blacks, women, Latinos, and gays are a numerical minority, that it's important to fight in the context of a majoritarian strategy involving coalition politics, that discrimination against one group, no matter who they are, not only harms that group, but harms democracy itself. And therefore,
powerful words. Those are very...
For a coalition involving blacks, Latinos, women, gays, and any other discriminated group to fight for the rights, not just of those who are discriminated against, but the rights of all.
Those are very powerful words. I hear words of coalition building, connecting the dots, and this is stuff. I mean, what you're talking about, the movement, the work that you were doing. This was strong back in the '60s. This kind of was in the '60s and '70s. Do you think that this effort has moved forward? Do you think we're getting better at connecting the dots and building coalitions, or do you think we've lost something in terms of that type of coalition building from the '60s and '70s?
I think we still have a coalition that's in place. We've seen the various voices emerge from of the coalition, as was referred to by other speakers earlier on this program, and I think that the coalition still exists and is being built and broadened to include the concerns of other groups, as, for example, those who've come out for marriage equality.
Right.
So I think we have a coalition that's not only still in place, but a coalition that has the prospects to being broadened and strengthened.
That's great to hear. And Baird Rustin certainly would be proud to see marriage equality on the forefront of what's happening in the movement today, I think. So thank you for calling in, Norman. Thank you for your comments.
And speaking of Baird Rustin, I mean, he had to adopt his partner to ensure that his partner was in line for his inheritance. And as a kid, I didn't know who Baird Rustin was. I mean, he was not in the forefront in terms of as visible as Martin Luther King.
Right.
But I can remember him being at the Democratic Convention talking to Eric Sevareid. And I wondered, who is this articulate black man? They were totally talking as equals, as raconteur, and so I didn't know he was gay. I didn't know anything about him, but he made a great impression. And when I finally did meet him in real life, I could connect it. He was a man on a lot of different levels. It wasn't just about his sexuality. It was about rights for other people. It was about union workers.
Right.
And I think when people see that the swatch of our interests is for everybody, I think it brings everybody on board.
Yes, I agree. Again, you're listening to Carmen, Neely, Robert West, and John Reddick here on Yetta Kurland Live, WWRL 1600 AM Equality Pride Radio. Call in. We have a few moments left. 212-868-0975. 212-868-0975. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more caller, and then I want you guys to give a plug on Harlem Pride and how people can get involved. Let's go to Ed from the Upper West Side. Ed, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live. You're on the air.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Well, it's fortuitous that you have the two most important movements of the latter part of the 20th century and the early part of the 21st century who were fighting for the same kind of recognition and acceptance as first-class citizens, which everybody is. There is no second-class citizen in the United States, or hopefully there is none.
There shouldn't be, anyway. That's right.
Sometimes that's not recognized, anyway.
Right.
So I just congratulate you for having both of them on, both those issues on your program, because they dovetail so nicely.
Well, thank you. And you know, some say that those are separate movements. Some say they're interconnected. What do you think the biggest challenge is for disenfranchised peoples, whether they be from the LGBT community, whether they be from communities of color, or other disenfranchised groups? What's the challenge for us as a nation, us as a society, to move forward the idea that everyone is a first-class citizen?
Well, one of the challenges is to get people to read, get the super patriots to read the Declaration of Independence, and read the Constitution of the United States. That would be a start.
Fair enough.
If they're the patriots they say they are, they would read those documents and understand what our heritage is at its highest moments. And that would be a great start.
Born on the idea of emancipation and equality for all.
Right.
Indeed. Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for calling in, Ed. We have just a few. Thank you. I know you guys are there's a Community Pride Center initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about that and give us a plug? Let us know where folks can go online to learn about you or to get involved.
Okay, well, definitely you can check us out at www.harlempride.org. And we do have a Community Pride Center initiative. We're working on spearheading and actually getting a Community Pride Center for Harlem, Upper Manhattan. We're Harlem Pride, river to river, 110th to 155th and beyond.
I know there's a community center on 13th Street in the West Village. I know there's a community center in Brooklyn. I think there's one in Queens. There's currently not a community center in Harlem. Is that right?
No, and we want to serve the people where they are. I think Harlem
reasonable.
Has a diverse SGL, same gender loving LGBT community, and we'd love to serve that community, providing safe space for youth, comfort zone, as we like to call it, for our elders, as well as office space for other SGL LGBT organizations, and provide some programs and activities and allow partnerships to come in to provide services. That's lacking right now. You know, some youth can't go all the way downtown.
Sure.
They're too young,
Sure.
or sometimes transportation is an issue for our elders. So we're working on spearheading that whole initiative. And you can find out more on the website. Again, that's www.harlempride.org. Check us out for memberships. We have those annually for $25. Volunteer, and definitely sign the petition. And if you're a business, email us at info@harlempride.org to find out about how you can endorse us.
That's great. And do you find, I guess the last quick question is, what's the reception been in Harlem on these ideas and on the work that you're doing around Harlem Pride?
It's been amazing, the support that we've gotten. I mean, I'll take us back to the very first Harlem Pride. At one point, I saw some of our elders with tears just streaming down their face, and I thought something negative had happened. Maybe there was some homophobic word said or something. So I rushed over. Come to find out, they were crying because they never thought they would be able to see that type of celebration in Harlem. And not that it would be something that, you know, you couldn't have in your house. And like we talked about earlier, Harlem's been very welcoming throughout its history. However, just to have it out and loud and proud in that way, never fathomed it. And of course, once that happened, the next thought was, why can't we have a center in Harlem? Why can't we have something in Uptown? We have libraries downtown. We have recreation centers downtown. Does that mean we shouldn't also have them uptown? So that's what we're spearheading. We're definitely working on that.
Sounds amazing. Contradicting stereotypes, creating opportunities, empowering communities, connecting diversity, coalition building, empowering ourselves, getting outside of ourselves to fight for others. All great ideas. Thank you so much, guys, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for the work that you're doing. Again, one last time, harlempride.org is where you can go.
Yes.
In June, you'll be doing a lot of activities, but there's stuff happening year-round. What's your next upcoming event that's happening, I assume, in February or in March?
In March, we actually have a tour of the Schomburg's Gay and Lesbian Archives.
Wow.
March 9th, and that's Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. More information and RSVP on our website. Again, that's harlempride.org.
Great. Well, thank you guys again for coming on the air.
Thank you.
Thanks for the work that you're doing. Again, check it out, harlempride.org, and tune in next week to Yetta Kurland Live, WWRL 1600, Equality Pride Radio, 10 p.m. Wednesday nights. We'll see you here.
You're listening to 1600 WWRL, New York, your education station.
The preceding program was independently produced. The views and opinions expressed were those of the program host and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of WWRL, its staff, or management.